Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Validity Podcast. I'm your host, Valentina Rodriguez, and this is episode 9. Wild. I was looking through all my notes from my lectures from the Science of Physique Enhancement course last semester, which is the majority of the podcast episodes have been derived from that course, and we are down to like the last 2 lectures. And what we're going to be talking about today is fat loss supplements. And in this course, we only discussed 2 supplements that Dr. Campbell believes are the 2 with the most evidence supporting them for aiding fat loss. And this episode is going to be all about yohimbine, and then we'll go through caffeine research in another episode. So those were the 2 fat loss supplements that we really discussed in the course, but we are going to split it up into a part 1 and a part 2. So this is fat loss supplements part 1. Before we get into the science, you already know some updates on the research that we do in Dr. Campbell's lab, the Performance and Physique Enhancement Lab. We are about 1 week away from opening the study. And because I record episodes 1 week early, that means when this episode drops, it is very likely that the world's first reverse dieting study will officially be open for recruitment. And I've already gotten some emails, and everything that you need for reaching out if you're interested in participating is linked in the description. But basically, if you are interested in undergoing a maintenance phase, then a pretty aggressive caloric deficit followed by one of 3 post-dieting strategies to study the mitigation of weight regain post-dieting, then please email reversedietstudy@gmail.com to let us know you're interested in participating, and we will get back to you because we're going to finalize all the details at the research meeting that we have later today, and within the next week, get everything absolutely ready to go to open the floodgates and start the world's first reverse diet study. Wild. I'm so fucking excited. Like, this is the coolest thing I've ever been a part of. And, you know, from the literal inception of it to now the official execution of the study. Wild, wild, wild. Cannot wait to see what this brings. But in terms of personal updates, so you guys know I plateaued for a bit, finally started responding, seeing some lows. I hit another new low this morning, and it is refeed day. So overall, Friday vibes are so high for me. We still don't know if we'll be able to do the original show that I had planned to do. We're still kind of taking it day by day and playing it by ear. But my last check-in on Wednesday, my coach essentially said, if we keep moving at the rate that we suddenly started moving at, then we'll be able to do the show. So things are kind of looking up for me, and I'm trying not to get attached because, again, I went into this prep like just not attached to a specific show, to a specific anything, just abiding by choosing the route that is the most strategic for my goal of becoming pro. So we're just going to keep on keeping on. I am very, very, very hungry, and I am very, very, very tired, but we're getting it done. And it's so worth it. And I'm so happy I'm finally responding. We also, outside of prep, other personal updates, we just finished up final season. I took an in-person final on Tuesday, and I actually got 100 on it. So I'm feeling so proud. I studied so hard, I'm not going to lie. And I also have like 8 extra credit points from like a review game that we did that I won. So 108 on the final. Slay. I had a paper due yesterday and then a take-home portion to the exam that I took in person. The take-home portion is due tonight, which I finished it. I just have to like read it over and submit it. So yeah. So all in all, wrapped up the spring semester. Going to be starting summer courses on Monday. So back to the grind, but this little weekend off was nice while it lasted, I guess. I guess I really do have to realize that this is like my little intra-semester weekend. I'm going to the beach. Very excited. So anyways, it's time to get into the science. So like I said, this episode is all about yohimbine. I feel like I had always heard so much about yohimbine, and I honestly didn't know too much about it, at least like scientifically and mechanistically before this lecture. And we're going to be looking at 4 different studies on yohimbine and just kind of talking about how it works. So what is yohimbine? It comes from the bark of this tree native to Central and Western Africa called the yohimbine evergreen tree. Yohimbine itself is the active extract of the yohimbe bark. So yohimbine is the active extract. Yohimbe, without the ine at the end, is the tree. And yohimbe bark is the bark of the tree, and yohimbine is an active chemical that's extracted from the bark. If you are going out and about and you want to purchase some yohimbine at your local GNC, I don't know, Amazon, I don't know, do not purchase yohimbine bark extract because you don't know the dosing of the actual active ingredient, and that's what we use for dosing. You don't even know how much you're getting. You can't guarantee the quality. The dose is not going to be accurate. So always look for yohimbine and not yohimbine bark extract when you are purchasing it. So first, let's talk a little bit about how it works in the body. So we have these two types of receptors. We have adrenergic alpha receptors and we have adrenergic beta receptors. Both of them are present on your adipocytes, which are your fat cells. And in order to burn fat for energy, it's a two-part process. First, you need to break down the adipocyte, break down the fat cell. You take the triglycerides in that fat cell, you break them down into free fatty acids and a glycerol backbone. Those free fatty acids can then circulate and be delivered to working tissue, working cells, where the fatty acids are then oxidized in the mitochondria for energy. So first you break down fat and then you burn it. And where yohimbine actually works is on the breakdown part of this fat loss pathway, if you will. And the breakdown of fat is called lipolysis. So with these two receptors, the adrenergic alpha receptors and the adrenergic beta receptors, they both affect the lipolytic pathway. And they are both present on your adipocytes. So the alpha receptors, you have alpha 1 and alpha 2. Alpha 2 inhibits lipolysis. So it prevents the breakdown of these fat cells, of these adipocytes into fatty acids that can later be burned. Beta receptors, you have beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, they stimulate lipolysis. So they activate this pathway that starts to break down these triglycerides into fatty acids for eventual oxidation and burning for energy. So with both of these receptors present on adipocytes, it's about the ratio of which one is activated. If you activate the alpha receptors more than you activate the beta receptors, you're going to get an overall net decrease in your lipolysis activation. If you activate your beta receptors more so than you activate your alpha receptors, you're going to get a net stimulation or increase in the lipolytic pathway. So where yohimbine actually works is at the alpha 2 receptor level. So like we said, the alpha 2 receptor inhibits lipolysis. And innately in the body, these receptors, both the alpha and the beta, they're adrenergic receptors, meaning catecholamines bind to them, meaning epinephrine, norepinephrine. And when catecholamines bind to the alpha 2 receptor, it inhibits sympathetic outflow from the central nervous system. So it inhibits norepinephrine release. So you activate alpha 2, you inhibit norepinephrine release, so then norepinephrine cannot be secreted and bind to the beta receptors because norepinephrine has a preferential affinity for beta receptors. So what yohimbine does is it inhibits alpha 2 receptors. So by inhibiting the inhibitory receptor on those adipocytes, you get an overall net stimulatory effect. So by inhibiting the alpha 2 receptor, yohimbine allows the consequent increase in norepinephrine secretion, because if you activate the alpha 2 receptor, you block norepinephrine release. But if you inhibit the alpha 2 receptor, you allow norepinephrine to be secreted, which allows for more beta activation, which allows for increased lipolysis. Norepinephrine has a preferential affinity for beta 3, which is more so abundant in the adipocytes. So all in all, yohimbine is an antagonist of alpha 2 receptors. So it blocks the alpha 2 receptor, which is an inhibitory receptor. It blocks lipolysis. So if you block the receptor blocking lipolysis, you effectively allow lipolysis activation to increase via the secretion of norepinephrine that can bind to the beta receptors. I hope that makes sense. But that is essentially how yohimbine works in the body. And the biggest thing about science, about supplements, is that you can get a lot of studies showing you what a supplement does mechanistically, and it does not always translate to actual outcomes when it comes to the individual level, when it comes to body composition, metabolism, actual applied outcomes. The mechanistic pathway does not always translate to results, essentially. So we're going to be looking at 4 studies, and they're not mechanistic. They are applied studies, and we're going to see what yohimbine did in these studies. So the first study that we discussed is called Alpha-2 Antagonist Compounds and Lipid Mobilization by Galitsky et al. It was published in 1988, so definitely an earlier study. And the main premise of the study was that they had 14 males, and they were given yohimbine either 1 hour after eating, or they were given yohimbine fasted. And what they found was that when it was taken fasted, it increased their free fatty acid levels in their plasma, in their blood. So all this first study tells us is if we are taking yohimbine, we should take it fasted. And it does seem to effectively increase lipolysis, because that increase in free fatty acids is a result of the lipolytic pathway that liberates triglycerides from adipocytes and breaks them down into free fatty acids. So those free fatty acids can now go on and be oxidized for energy. But that doesn't mean they will be oxidized for energy, because fatty acids can be reesterified right back into triglycerides, right back into the adipocyte. You still need to be in a caloric deficit. So this doesn't really tell us it works for fat loss. It tells us at the very least it is stimulating lipolysis, which is what we expect to based on its mechanism of action. So the next study that we're going to look at is a little bit more one step further. It's literally called Does Yohimbine Act as a Slimming Drug? ? Which I think is a silly, goofy little title, but it's cute. Okay, it's by Cusio et al., and it was published in 1991. Again, yohimbine's been around for a minute, so these studies are not necessarily new by any means. And it was done on 20 females with obesity. So there were 2 different conditions, and both conditions had 2 parts to it. So first, there was a 21-day period where all subjects were on a 1,000-calorie diet. After those 21 days on 1,000 calories, you continued your 1,000-calorie diet for another 21 days. But for those second 21 days, you were either given 20 milligrams of yohimbine or you were given a placebo. So 21 days, no supplements, 1,000-calorie diet, followed by another 21 days on 1,000 calories with either yohimbine or placebo. And the yohimbine was administered 4 times a day, 5 milligrams each, and it was to be taken at least 90 minutes before eating. So what did they find in this study? The participants that were taking yohimbine, the second half of the study instead of the placebo, lost more body mass, so they lost more weight than the placebo condition. So that's already one study saying, hey, it actually does accelerate fat loss. Obviously, this was a pretty aggressive diet, but it was well controlled. It was done in obese females, but at least this study is already pointing, okay, we have some evidence that the mechanism is translating to actual weight loss outcomes. So let's keep going. Study number 3. This one is called Yohimbine Does Not Affect Fat Distribution in Men. It's published by Dr. Sachs in 1991. This was done on 33 obese males, and it was interesting. It was a pretty long study. It was 6 months. So they reduced their food intake to 1,800 calories for 6 months. And they were encouraged to do exercise 3 times a week. And they were randomized to either placebo or to yohimbine. And the yohimbine dosing started at 16 milligrams a day. And they increased it eventually, like gradually, to 43 milligrams a day. And again, there was either a yohimbine group or a placebo group for those 6 months, both of them on 1,800 calories, so both of them in a caloric deficit. And what they found was no difference in weight loss. There were no differences in weight loss between the 2 groups. There was no difference in weight loss, in loss of body fat, or in change in weight to height ratio, or in change of visceral to subcutaneous fat ratio. So literally no changes across the board. So now we have 2 contradicting studies, which just goes to show that very, very rarely do you get a supplement that like overwhelmingly all the evidence is saying like, yes, you'll see caffeine in the next episode, but literally other than caffeine, there's just, anyways, we move on because now we have one study saying it increases your weight loss, the other one saying absolutely no difference. And both of those included caloric deficits, so both lost weight. It's just that in this one specifically, the yohimbine didn't cause you to lose more weight than if you weren't taking yohimbine. So The last study that we're going to look at is not done on obese individuals. So the first one was obese females. The second one was obese males. This one's done on resistance-trained male soccer players. It's called yohimbine, The Effects on Body Composition and Exercise Performance in Soccer Players by Ostajic. And it was published in 2006, so also more recent. It included 20 resistance-trained male soccer players, a little bit younger, around 24 years old. They were instructed to just keep training their usual training, to not change their nutrition at all. So this was not controlled for intake the way the other two were. They were not meant to be on a deficit. They're already active resistance training athletes, and they're just saying, would the introduction of yohimbine change anything about your body composition at all if you continue doing what you're doing? So they were randomized to either a 20 milligram yohimbine group or a placebo group, and the intervention lasted for 3 weeks. They were instructed to change nothing else. And what they found was that in the group of soccer players taking the yohimbine, they lost 2.2% body fat. And the placebo group actually gained 0.3% body fat. So now we have 4 studies we looked at. One of them did not look at body composition outcomes. It just looked at fatty acid levels in the plasma, and they said, okay, yes, it increases lipolysis. Second study on obese females said, okay, it increases weight loss. Third study on obese males said, okay, it doesn't have an effect at all on weight loss. Fourth study on resistance-trained athletes said, okay, it increases the amount of body fat that you lose. So looking at the 3 body comp studies that we looked at, 2 are in favor of yohimbine. The other one is neutral. It doesn't help, it doesn't hurt. So typically the way we discuss this in Dr. Campbell's class, and this was an approach that we take with most things that are not harmful, if there's enough evidence suggesting that it can be beneficial and that it can be efficacious for the outcome that you're looking for, and there's some studies saying, hey, it might not make a difference at all, then typically we will recommend it, because there's no studies saying that it hurts your outcomes, and there's no study saying that it causes harm, side effects, or anything kind of detrimental. So if we have some positive and a couple neutral outcomes, typically that still keeps you in the net positive when it comes to evidence supporting yohimbine as a fat loss supplement. So the last thing that we talked about in this lecture is just dosing, because we have a study that did 20 milligrams a day divided into 4 doses. We have a study that titrated from 16 milligrams all the way up to 43 milligrams a day. So all in all, what is the dosing? And the recommended dose we talked about that Dr. Campbell said was 0.2 milligrams per kilogram of body mass. So for a 91 kilogram male, that's about 18 milligrams of yohimbine a day. For a 70 kilogram person, that would be 14 milligrams per day. And within this dosing, there are no side effects scientifically documented, but some side effects can be reported. And typically those come from like headaches, maybe a little bit of anxiety, but none have been scientifically documented. That is very, very, very important. In all the yohimbine studies, nobody reported anything. There's nothing been documented in the scientific literature. But also based on the fasted versus fed study, apart from the dosing, which is 0.2 milligrams per kg of body mass, it should also be taken on an empty stomach. So I know that some of the studies divided the dose into multiple subdoses a day. So like the second study we looked at was 4 doses of 5 milligrams, and those were to be taken 90 minutes before your meal. So as fasted as you can be when you're not fasted first thing in the morning. So recommended dosing and administration is fasted 0.2 milligrams per kg of body weight. The last thing we talked about was this big review from Harvard that these Harvard researchers basically purchased 49 different yohimbine or yohimbi extract supplements. So, we talked about they're not the exact same thing. And they took all these different yohimbine and yohimbi extract supplements that they could find. There were 49, and they measured how much actual active yohimbine was in the supplements. So it was like a quality control little study. And firstly, only 11 of the 49 different supplements they purchased actually listed the specific quantity and dosing of yohimbine present in the supplement. And most of those were inaccurately labeled. So only 4.1%, so only 2 supplements, only 2 little bottles of the 49 that they purchased and tested, only 2 of those had both accurate information on the label and accurate amount inside the product. So only 2 of them actually contained what they listed, which is wild, which is just a little note of caution for anybody looking to potentially purchase yohimbine, because you don't know if you know what you're getting. And I wish I knew which of those two were the accurate ones so that I could say these were the two out of the 49 that actually contained what they listed and were transparent and accurate with their dosing and the amount that they contained. But I don't know which of the two they were. So that's unfortunate. But just be very cautious of like the quality of the company that you're buying this from. And again, make sure it's yohimbine and not yohimbe bark extract. So personally, I have actually never taken yohimbine. I was very motivated to after this lecture, but I wasn't in a fat loss phase, and we haven't implemented it, but I might ask my coach about it next check-in now that I'm completely reminded about the fact that there's some evidence suggesting that it could help. So that is what I have for you for the day. This is Fat Loss Supplements Part 1, and we will discuss all about the science behind caffeine for fat loss next episode. Friendly reminder, as always, if you are interested in being a participant in the world's first reverse dieting study, please reach out to reversedietstudy@gmail.com. We are most likely already officially recruiting by the time this episode comes out. So I am just very excited to connect with all of you and see if we can get you onboarded as an eligible subject in the study. This is still so wild to me. So I'm going to go get ready for the research meeting that I have every single Friday. I'm going to keep on keeping on. I'll keep you guys updated on my prep updates. I know I said this last episode, but my prep YouTube series is probably coming out soon. It's literally just a matter of me pressing publish. But I can't seem to get myself to do that, and I don't quite know why, but I'm sure I'll get myself to do that soon. So with that, I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day, of your weekend, of your week. As always, please feel free to reach out to me via Instagram or via my email, thevaliditypodcast@gmail.com, to contradict me, ask me questions, give me topics you want me to cover, anything and everything. And with that, I will see you guys in the next episode.